Good morning and welcome to today's National Hog Farmer webinar, Early Intervention, your key to getting more full market value hogs. This webinar is brought to you by Ralco. My name is Kevin Schultz, Senior Staff Writer with National Hog Farmer, and I will be your moderator today. In a moment, I will be turning things over to our speaker, but first, let me explain how you can get the most out of this event. To improve your viewing and listening experience, you can move your webcast windows around by dragging on the title bar or resizing them by clicking on their lower right corner. At the bottom of your screen, you will find multiple application widgets. A copy of today's slide deck is available for download in the green resource list widget. We welcome questions about our topic and will answer as many as we can following the presentation, but feel free to submit yours to the queue at any time. Just type it into the Q&A window on the left side of your screen and hit the Submit button. Please also be aware that today's session is being recorded and will be available for on-demand viewing. You will be notified by email when the archive is available. Now more than ever, livestock and poultry producers are turning to Ralco for natural and innovative solutions to convert more nutrients into gain. Ralco was founded in 1971 with the belief of using natural approaches whenever possible to improve nutrient conversion in plants and animals. Ralco's patented approaches in essential oils, energy maximizing diets, and microbial processes ensure that plants and animals keep energy focused on production versus fighting off challenges and waste. While Ralco has expanded to become a global business with distribution in more than 40 countries, they continue to operate with trust and integrity as a third-generation family business based in Marshall, Minnesota. For additional information on products and services offered by Ralco, visit ralcoagriculture.com or call 1-800-533-5306. Now let me introduce today's presenter. Dr. Russell Fent is Director of the Swine Technical Group at Ralco. He received his PhD in swine nutrition from the University of Missouri and his MS from Oklahoma State University. He has worked in the areas of research, product development, technical support, diet formulation, and implementation of technologies in commercial application. Dr. Fent is a member of the American Society of Animal Science and the American Registry of Professional Animal Scientists, and has served on the non-ruminant nutrition and swine extension committees for the Midwestern section of ASAS. You can find more information about our speaker by clicking on the speaker bio widget at the bottom of your screen. With that, let's get started. Dr. Russell Fent, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Kevin. Appreciate that. As Kevin mentioned, today we're going to discuss early intervention as a way to look at more full market value hogs. And so more specifically, some of the areas we're going to look at today, we're going to explore where are our pigs going throughout the production cycle. We're going to look at opportunities where we can look for more full value market hogs along the line. We're going to also look at what are the greatest opportunity points for intervention during the production cycle. And then specifically, we're going to look at some specific examples of intervention strategies. And then finally, we will address some implementation and the ability to track some success. And so first off, when we look at where are our pigs going, basically in our industry, less than 70% of our product gets to market at a full value. And this is something that's been commonly accepted over time. And so really, no matter what type of production or industry that you're in, the fact of losing 30% of our product that becomes low value or no value is really inefficient. And it's really something that we need to start asking ourselves, where are the opportunities where we can get more market value pigs to market and increase the profitability through that. Dr. John Dean at the University of Minnesota has conducted a lot of work in the past, and this outlines some of his work where he looked at where attrition of full value market pigs are along their timeline. And so this graphic shows from birth all the way to market And while he does have mummies and stillborns that are in this, really the vast majority of that attrition after that comes in the form of mortalities, culls, and lightweight pigs at market. And so, in fact, you can see that over 30% of the pigs are lost that don't become full value. Furthermore, Dr. Dean has also looked at where are the components that contribute to variation in profitability. We commonly, when we look at measuring sticks of success of our growing pigs through nursery and grow finish, we'll commonly look at average daily gain and feed conversion rates as our main measuring sticks of success. What's interesting, Dr. Dean points out, while those have components, are certainly components of profitability, what contributes the most to variations in profitability are mortalities, culls, and lightweight pigs, and certainly an eye-opener to be able to address that from a profitability standpoint. So when we start looking at where can we look for more full value market hogs along the way, we look at some data here that was published by the National Hog Farmer, by the National Pork Board in 2018. This is they have a report that is a 6-year average report over that span of time, and this is the mortality data from that report. And so what's interesting to point out here from 2012 to 2017 is illustrated on this graph by production phase. So you see pre-weaning mortality is listed, also nursery, finisher, and then also a wean to finish mortality is also added here as well. And as we might expect in 2013 and 14, we had PED that came to the U.S. and spiked during that time. So you would expect mortality to increase during that 2013 and 14 time period on this graph. But after that, as things normalize, you would expect that mortality to then come back to pre-PED levels. But in fact, when you look at all of these stages of growth here, while it did come down some, it never has returned to that 2012 mortality levels in any of these production phases. And so it's also something we commonly have also seen in recent years on the sow side as well, where mortality has increased there as well. And so certainly some opportunities to look at why that is continuing to increase. And I know there's been a lot of work done in different areas to look at that, but certainly an opportunity to try to improve livability of the animals along the way. Another aspect is in swine production, in our swine industry, we've had a lot of emphasis on growing more pigs and increasing productivity. And our industry has done a tremendously good job in improving selection for litter size. And through that selection, have had a dramatic improvement in litter size. But with that, you get some changes. And so this graph shows across the bottom is with litter size, as it increases, you'll see that the yellow line is average birth weight of pigs in a litter. And so as litter size has increased, the average birth weight of the pigs in those litters has decreased as well. And then in the green line, you can see that is the percentage of pigs that are born less than 2 pounds of body weight, and that has increased linearly as litter size also increases. And so we are getting more pigs, we're getting larger litters, but at the same time we're getting smaller pigs and also a higher percentage of what we might call very small pigs in those groups that may require further attention. If we look further into looking at some data and looking at distribution of body weights based on birth weights of pigs, this is some data from a little more than 6,000 pigs. These are individual weights here, and across the bottom you can see that data is broken up by half-pound body weight increments. And first off, you can see that it looks like a normal distribution. Kind of have your standard bell-shaped curve there, and you can see that where the body weight breaks are there. One thing to point out is about less than 2.5 pounds of body weight. That makes up more than 10% of the population that is less than 2.5 pounds of body weight. Now we take this same set of body weight breaks with the same data set, and we lay pre-weaning mortality on top of that, And you can see that the very small pigs, as we might imagine, have an extremely high pre-weaning mortality. That does improve pretty dramatically until you get down to a point where it does level off, weighing that 2.5 to 3 pound range. It starts to level off right there. Now, if we take this data and we lay those two graphs on top of each other, so we've got weight distribution of the pigs that are in green, and we have pre-weaning mortality in the yellow. And probably the first thing to look at, while the pigs that are less than 1.5 pounds of birth weight, while they have a very high pre-weaning mortality, they make up a very small percentage of the population. You move to the next weight group, they still have a pretty high pre-weaning mortality, but again, a fairly small percentage of the population. And so that group that's really that very smallest category, less than 1.5 pounds, that's really probably what we would determine to be mostly non-viable pigs that really we would have a tougher time of success of dealing with those pigs and improving their livability and success after that. And so really it focuses in on where's kind of the point we can look for opportunity pigs. Maybe not the pigs that are the low viability pigs that are the biggest challenge to try to save, but where are some of these pigs that we have some mortality issues with, we may have some growth issues with, and they make up still a significant proportion of the population. And that could be an area that we could focus in on some improvements or some interventions with those types of pigs. And so with this graph, these would be in that 2 to 2.9 pound range for this, but it could be dependent on particular farm situations. Some data that was published by Feldposh and Kansas State University here just this last year in 2019. They were looking at the effect of birth weight on pre-weaning mortality, and so you see that shape of that curve is very similar to that last data set that we showed, but they focused in on where is that point of inflection, where is that break in that data that's really what would be determined as the threshold for birth weight as it relates to pre-weaning mortality. And what they concluded was that was about 2.45 pounds of birth weight being that weight threshold for pre-weaning mortality. And so if we look at things we might want to focus in on improving pre-weaning mortality, it would be right around where that weight threshold would be, and also to the left a little bit of that birth weight 2.45 pound threshold would be in areas of pigs that we could potentially focus in on and improve their survivability. Some further data that had been published in 2013 actually looked at similar weight threshold but based on birth weight, but it was more linked to growth performance downstream. And what the first study in 2013 showed was they found that a 2.81 pound birth weight was a critical threshold to really ensure good future growth performance of those animals. And then another set of data published in 2012 actually looked at it a little different way. They looked at it in terms of variation of distance from the average weight of the group. So what they found was they looked at the average or the mean body weight of a group of pigs, and they found that pigs that were 2.5 standard deviations below what the mean weight of the group was, those pigs did not have the potential for adequate growth performance downstream. And in fact, these pigs were what we might call runt pigs or intrauterine growth retarded pigs early on, that they weren't successful down the road. But they did find that there was a subpopulation of pigs that were only 2 standard deviations less than the mean, and they identified that those pigs could grow at a similar rate and with success similar to the rest of their litter mates and the rest of the group. And so they identified that those were the most interesting group in terms of potential interventions of those pigs to improve their growth performance later on. And so really from our talk, we might identify those as our opportunity pigs in this example. And so when we look at that along the way in the production cycle, also what I try to identify where are our greatest points for intervention to improve the number of full value market animals at market. And so we know that weight variability increases from birth all the way until market. So we know pigs are born with a certain amount of variation of birth weight within a group, and that only gets bigger as it goes on out to market. So this graph shows that, for instance, at birth weight, The standard deviation of this group of pigs, potential group of pigs, was about 1 standard deviation, or 1 pound, and then when you get out to market, that standard deviation is about 26 pounds of body weight. So we do know that weight variation increases over time. From this particular study here in 2018, they tried to focus in on that and say, okay, based on that, what area or what production phase creates the most variability in body weight? And what they found was from birth until the nursery phase, they were actually creating the greatest percentage of weight variation that was added to those pigs. And so this coefficient of variation is what this graph shows, basically shows, and they concluded that periods during lactation and the nursery phase, those were the periods that actually created the most variation in body weight. And they determined that because of that, those are the areas that would be the best potential for focusing in on maintaining uniformity of body weight, so you don't have pigs that fall out during that time period. That study, same study there from 2018, also looked at long-term performance of those pigs and determined that in a normal or in a typical finishing flow where we may have 2 barn cuts when we market pigs, 2 barn cuts in marketing, and then a barn dump at the end, what they found was that pigs that were born less than 2.65 pounds of body weight, they were 1.5 times more likely to be in that last barn dump or that last set of pigs that goes to market. They also found that pigs that were less than 10.74 pounds of body weight at weaning were 7 times more likely to be in that last set of barn dump pigs at the end. And so to reiterate, what they found was that lactation and nursery phases were the 2 most critical periods in relation to growth suppression and also increasing weight variability. And so those would be areas that we could focus on. And so the remainder of the talk, we're going to discuss some interventions and some strategies during those particular time periods of lactation and nursery phase specifically. We also would be remiss not to talk a little bit about some gestation, and we'll kind of just touch on that briefly prior to that. And so we know during gestation, when we're feeding a sow in gestation or managing her, we know that there's factors that can affect what the piglet's health, growth, and livability can occur after they're born. And we know we can do some of those things upstream in the gestating sow. So some quick examples would be gestation diet composition, just making sure that you're feeding a properly formulated diet to your gestating sow to meet her needs, but also the needs of those pigs. Feeding management of the sow in terms of feeding amounts and also body condition score of those animals certainly is a critical component. And then we also know that things that we do to the sow and manage her in terms of health and immunity can have an impact on the piglet's health and immunity. So for instance, the piglets can be born from a healthier environment from the sow and into a healthier environment around her. And also we know that the sow can have an impact on those piglets through the passive immunity that's passed to her. So as an example of that during gestation, this is some data looking at feeding essential oils in a gestation diet to sows, and then the effect that it has on colostrum quality and passive immunity to the piglets. And so in this study, you'll see on the graph on the left, looks at colostrum quality in terms of the amount of IgG or immunoglobulin G content that is in colostrum. This is research that was conducted at the University of Minnesota, and in this, they collected colostrum from sows that were either fed oregano, essential oil product, versus a control. And what they found was sows that were fed the oregano had greater IgG in their colostrum than the control sows. So the question becomes, so what? What does that mean, and what does that translate into? And so on the right, you see that they took blood samples from sows and piglets. And so you'll see that the sows, while they did have some numerical difference, it wasn't a statistical difference between the sows. But when you look at the piglets themselves, you'll see that the pre-suckling, before the pigs nursed, their circulating IgG levels were very low, as we might expect. They hadn't nursed the sow yet. Yet after they nursed the sow, then they took blood samples from those pigs and found that the pigs that nursed the sows that had been fed oregano during gestation, those piglets did have greater circulating IgG in their blood. And so really, if you look back over to the left, you'll see that colostrum pattern from the colostrum quality actually did translate into those pigs post-suckling, which tells us it was a higher quality colostrum that translated into better passive immunity passed on to the piglets. That study went on to track those piglets all the way throughout their life, and this is a graph looking at serum IGF-1 levels of these piglets, basically from birth until market. And what IGF-1 is a growth hormone and is an indicator of growth performance of those animals. And what they saw was they found significant improvements in IGF-1 growth hormone in these pigs that had come from sows that had been fed oregano during their gestation and lactation periods of time. And in fact, when they followed these pigs in terms of their growth performance, you'll see across the bottom, these are body weight measurements at different days of these pigs' life until market. And you'll see that the pigs that were fed, pigs that came from sows that were fed oregano had greater body weights all the way until market at all the time periods where they weighed these pigs. And so this is an example of an early intervention upstream before the pigs were born, giving an intervention to sows as an essential oil product, have an effect on those piglets all the way downstream until market. Now, if we look at the next set of data, this is again some sow data. This is, if you see across the bottom, there's 6 different experiments that are represented in these bars. And they represent a little more than 5,000 litters on this study. And this these studies looked at providing essential oils to the sow diet in gestation and lactation. And what this data here is, this is pre-weaning mortality of the piglets. And you'll see across all of these studies, you see a numerical advantage in pre-weaning mortality in those pigs being reduced, less mortality in the pigs that came from sows that had been fed oregano. And in multiple of these studies, we had dramatic differences in that, depending on the challenges that were in the study. So again, having an impact on livability of these pigs as well by an upstream intervention. Now, once these pigs are born, we know that it's immediately critical to get these pigs started as quickly as we can. So we know the pigs are born with a very limited amount of energy stored in their body. They're basically born with very little fat. They do have glycogen storage in their body, but you'll see from this graph that it's not near enough to support what that pig's energy requirement is just that first 24 hours of his life. And so it's critical to get that pig nursing and get him going as quickly as possible. And so one of the ways, just as an example of an intervention, this is one where we're looking at bioactives coming from actually bovine colostrum and administered to pigs on day 1 with just a single dose. And so this is some data where we looked at giving these bioactives to all pigs in a litter, so all the pigs, and you'll see that their birth weight is similar. Their weaning weight, by giving them the colostrum bioactives from First Pulse D, they had almost a half a pound advantage in weaning weight, and their pre-weaning mortality was reduced by about 3 percentage units. Now, what's interesting, that's giving it to all pigs, but if you take it further and you look at what are just the bottom 20% of that population based on birth weight, so maybe focusing in more on those opportunity potential pigs, and you see that their birth weight was indeed lower, about 2.5 pounds average. Their weaning weight increased by about 0.6 of a pound above the control. And more dramatically, their pre-weaning mortality was dramatically reduced from 12% to about 4 percentage units. And so this is an example as an early intervention of getting pigs going and helping those pigs out to improve their growth and livability right away. Now, for continuing on during the lactation period, looking at another potential intervention early in life is to look at milk replacers in the farrowing crate. And so this would be an example of milk replacers can be applied in lots of different types of strategies, and I'll show you a couple here just briefly. But this is one here that is where a milk replacer was given in the farrowing crate, and pigs had access to it through a milk cup. They still had access to the sow. This was just supplemental milk that they had available to them in the crate. And so you'll see from this data set that there's about over 100 litters on each of the treatments, and you see that the pigs per litter is similar, birth weight is similar, weaning age is similar, and in fact pre-weaning mortality is pretty much similar across those. What you can see is that weaning weight was increased by more than half a pound in the pigs that did receive supplemental milk, and the percentage of the pigs that were weaned at less than 8 pounds of body weight as a full value pig at that standpoint was reduced by more than half. These pigs were also followed through nursery and growth and finisher, and they were tracked at the end in terms of their percentage of full value market hogs that were marketed. And so you see that the pigs that came from the birthright that were supplemented with birthright just in the farrowing crate, when we take those pigs and follow them all the way to market, in this study, they had more than 7 percentage units greater full value market pigs in this study. You see their substandards were similar, the number of culls were reduced, and the number of lightweight pigs were reduced by more than half. Now the question becomes, what are the days on feed? And I will point out that for this study that the birthright milk-fed pigs were actually 5 days less on feed when they went to market as compared to on average than the no milk-fed pigs. And so again, an example of an early life intervention strategy, providing it to those pigs, having a long-term effect on increasing more full market value hogs at the end of the day. And this is really where the profitability is dramatic in an example like that. Now, as I mentioned, that's an example of giving that to all pigs in the litter. Now, if we want to look at a strategy like this and say we want to target more specifically these opportunity pigs that we want to focus in on, okay? We want to target a subpopulation and look at those. And so this is a study that looked at that. And so you see that there's 2 columns here on this chart. And the one on the right would be both of these are very small pigs. So you see their starting body weights are about 2.2, 2.3 pounds of body weight on day 2 of age. And what these pigs were, they were split up where some of the pigs were left on the sow. These small pigs were left on the sow to see how they did on the sow. The remainder of these pigs were actually pulled off of the sow after 2 days. So they could still get colostrum from the sow, but they're pulled off for 2 days and placed in separate environment and be given. They were raised exclusively on birthright milk replacer. And so what's interesting when you look at this, if you look at their day 19 weaning weights, the pigs that were taken away from the sow and raised on the milk were almost 3 pounds heavier than the small pigs left on the sow. But probably the biggest advantage is the mortality difference. The small pigs left on the sow, pre-weaning mortality was 26%, but those that were pulled off and raised on the milk was only 5%. And then when you look at nursery outweights, on this study, it was about a 10-pound advantage of those small pigs. And then at a weight that was kind of mid finisher, again, they maintained and in fact grew that advantage in body weight. Now, there was a third treatment on this study that was actually looked at the big pigs of those litters that were kept on the sow to see how they performed. And really the key is to compare those to the other 2 groups. And you'll see that the big pigs that were left on the sow really had fairly similar growth performance and livability as the birthright, exclusively fed birthright small pigs that were very small after birth. And you'll see that downstream, they also grew similar in terms of nursery rate and kind of that mid-finisher weight as well. And so this would be an example of a targeted intervention to target a smaller subpopulation of these pigs and be successful with those down the road. And those pigs were tracked further in terms of looking at that mid-weight point of finisher when they were weighed, looked at distribution of body weight. And probably the big key to point out here, if you compare the yellow bars, those would be the small pigs that were left on the sow, and the green bars are the small pigs that were raised on the birthright milk replacer until they were weaned. You'll see that those birthright-fed pigs, that curve is shifted to the right, where there's more of those milk-fed pigs that were pushed into the higher weight categories, and in fact, compared to the big pigs in the gray bars, fairly similar in terms of the number of big pigs that were pushed up into that. And so could be an indication at the end of the day having potential for more full value market pigs at the end of the day. Now we shift to another intervention that could be adopted during the lactation period, and that's creep feeding. And so this is some data that looks at creep feeding. This was a study where there were 3 different creep feeding strategies that were used, either 4-day or 7-day, compared to the control. But the important part from this is just kind of look at those 3 creep feeding strategies together compared to the control. So you'll see that body weight was similar when they started creep feeding, which was further into the lactation period. You'll notice that feed intake just tells us basically that, yep, the creep-fed pre-treatments were fed, had creep feed intake versus the control had none. But you'll look at average daily gain and mortality, and you see no statistical differences and no real differences there between either creep feeding or not. So your initial indication would be, if you just stopped here, would say, well, the creep feeding had no value to us at that point, and so it didn't provide any value. However, creep feeding has been done for a long period of time, and so if we followed those pigs on into the nursery and looked at their growth performance in the nursery, and so this data looks at feed intake of these pigs in period 1, which is the first week, and then also a longer period of time in that nursery, which is the overall. And what you see is all 3 of the creep feed treatments had a significantly greater feed intake that first week, and also during a longer period of that nursery period, which is about a 3-week window there. And so during that period of time, this tells us that those pigs that have been fed creep feed in the crate, those pigs knew what feed was, they recognized what it was. When they went to the nursery, they could then eat feed quicker. Their behavior allowed for that, and they got on to feed sooner. So that tells us feed intake. Now, when we look at average daily gain, that did translate into better average daily gain, where the pigs that had been received the creep feeding, they had greater average daily gain than the controls, certainly during that first week, and also during the longer period in the nursery period as well. And so the bottom line here is the value of creep feeding comes in the nursery when you wean those pigs and get them started, which would potentially allow for less pigs to fall out, particularly your small pigs, getting them started quicker and less likely to fall out during that time period. So we know it's a key during the nursery period. So we transition into the nursery here and looking at nursery interventions early in that time period. We know it's key to get those pigs started as quickly as we can at weaning when we move them to the nursery phase. So looking at some data, this indicates the value of that first week's average daily gain on their days to market. So in general, if those pigs lose weight that first week, they're going to have much longer days to market versus if they're gaining weight at various levels during that first week. The more they gain, the better their days to market are down the road. And so really a key to that is get pigs on the feed as quickly as we can. And get them started once they hit the nursery. And so this is a graph looking at hours across the bottom after weaning. And then the area in the white is the percentage of the population of the pigs that are on feed or have eaten during that time period. And then the red area is what we would consider non-eaters, or pigs that have not eaten at all from the feeder during that time period. And so specifically, if you look at 24 hours, there's a line there that goes up. And it tells us that the percentage of pigs that have eaten is probably a little more than 75% in this data set that had eaten after 24 hours. However, what's significant is that indicates that more than 20% of the pigs have not eaten at all 24 hours after they have been placed into a nursery after weaning. And so you can see that the longer that those pigs go, that they're non-eaters, that's the time period where those pigs then become fallback pigs, which then become cull pigs or mortalities down the line, which then could then become your lightweight pigs or low value pigs that go into market. And so it's a key to get the pigs started and get them on the feed as quickly as possible. Another thing about nursery is this is an area where the pigs are the most efficient that they're ever going to be in their life. So this is a graph looking at a large data set of feed conversion numbers from basically weaning out to finishing. And you see that early in life, those pigs are the most efficient. So again, it's another area we can focus in on and invest in those pigs early on, where a pound a gain is the most efficient that it can be early on, and we want to capitalize on that, those animals during that time frame. And so when we really look at feeding in terms of the nutrition aspect of feeding pigs at weaning, really a key to this is feeding pigs appropriately by what the pigs can handle, what their biological, physiological machinery can handle, and what they can consume and grow off of and remain healthy during that time period. So this is a diagram here that looks at digestive enzyme development in pigs over time, and you'll see that by age is across the bottom. So you see that less than 3 weeks of age, let's say that those pigs are nursing the sow during that time period. So it's not surprising that the green line, the lactase enzyme, would be really high because those pigs are nursing a high lactose type of a diet. And so that's not surprising. And so at the same time, you'll see that the amylase and protease enzymes are relatively low. Their activity is low during that time period, and that indicates that that pig's not ready to digest things such as amylose starch or other types of other proteins that they're not easily being able to digest during that time period. So when we wean those pigs in about that 3 to 4 week window of time, we really look at that and say, well, what can that pig digest and what can he break down? Well, obviously this indicates that they can have a high ability to still break down lactose, which indicates that we want to provide some milk-based products into their diet, in their early diets. And also we want to keep some other amylose starches lower during that time period, and other proteins, plant-based proteins lower during that time period, which could cause some challenges from those pigs to digest. Now, you see that the enzyme profile changes over time period, and this is also an indication of why we feed these pigs in phases during that nursery period of time to more match what that pig can easily digest. And a key is really to transition that till you get to more of a lower lactose or no lactose, more simplified types of diets. And so when we look at that from an ingredient standpoint and how that comes together, really you can look at diets and classify those on a scale, looking at simple diets or complex types of diets. And when we break up those into ingredients, if you look on the right, we have complex ingredients. So really, what's a complex ingredients? Well, really by easy definition, those are going to be ingredients that are really highly digestible. They're easily utilized by the animal. They really match what the pig's digestive capacity is. And they can also be highly palatable as well. So some examples from that would be dried whey or whey permeate, plasma protein, oat-based types of ingredients, fish meals as an example, highly palatable simple sugars, yeast products, and the list can go on and on from there with lots of different types of specialty ingredients that you can add in a more complex diet. Now, the other side of that would be looking at simple ingredients, and those would be less easily digestible ingredients, maybe not optimal to match what the pig's digestive capacity is, and also not highly palatable. So some simple basic ingredients can be corn, soybean meal, DDGS as an example. So it's not always that these diets are either or, simple or complex. It's really a spectrum there. So you really have to look at your nutrition and see how simple is it, how complex is it, and based upon what the needs are based on your situation to match what those pigs need. And really a key is to be able to transition from a complex diet early and be able to transition those pigs to a simple diet as they grow. Now, if you feed a simple diet early, into the real early nursery diets, when you wean those pigs, those can create some digestive challenges. So those can contain some anti-nutritional factors that can cause some issues with the pigs in terms of intestinal integrity. They can induce some gut inflammatory response. It can potentially induce some dietary source scours because of that. They can also leave the pigs susceptible to pathogens and disease if it causes some gut damage during that. And that can cause some long-lasting damage in those animals if they're put on a too simple of a diet too quick. that can affect those animals throughout life in terms of nutrient, digestibility, and pigs that just would struggle throughout life after that time period. And so this is a key of why we want to certainly include feed budgeting appropriately and move to appropriate steps of diets appropriately as the pig is ready. Now, if we look at complex early nursery diets, these contain more multifunctional components, things that are there from a nutrition and nutrient digestibility standpoint, but also can be from a health standpoint as well. They can utilize some purified amino acids and easily digestible protein sources to limit the amount of soybean meal in the very early diets, so that's not overfed. That can cause some challenges in those pigs until they transition. Support optimal gut integrity and also promote gut barrier function and proper nutrient absorption. This is some older data here from the University of Nebraska, but it looked at simple versus complex diets, and you see that while those pigs started similarly, if you look at wait periods throughout the nursery period and then a period later in the finishing period, the pigs that were fed complex diets just during that early nursery phase did have a weight advantage during that nursery period, and maintained or grew that performance advantage during the later phases. When we look at some more recent data, some data out of 2017, what's interesting about this data is these are bigger body weights of pigs. These are 16-pound pigs. So some of us may say, well, those pigs are pretty big. They may not need so much of an early starter type of a diet. However, keep note that we feed pigs a lot based on age. So their physiological age is going to be the key that we feed them based on, more so than body weight early on. So those pigs, if they're transitioning and they're still 21 days old or 24 days old, they still need a diet based on their age. And so this study looked at simple versus complex, and then they looked at performance late in the finishing phase, and they saw just by those pigs fed a simple or a complex diet early in the early nursery phase, those pigs still had a 4-pound weight advantage when they got to that later finishing phases as well. So what's interesting about this too is we often track our performance of groups on closeouts and those types of things. We'll track those when we look at our gain or feed efficiency. We often look at that just as averages of the group. And the thing that we miss a lot by looking at just closeouts on an average basis is how many of those pigs make up that average, and how many of those pigs made it to the end as a full value pig. So your average performance doesn't always tell you a lot, but your number of pigs can add to that. And also the thing that we miss a lot is uniformity. What is the uniformity of that group? Well, that's hard to measure, because that requires taking individual pig weights, which is very hard to accomplish there. But it's certainly something that's going to contribute to our ultimate goal of more full value market pigs at the end, in terms of keeping that uniformity of that group and not having a lot of smalls or lights. And so this next study actually looked at weight uniformity of groups of pigs fed simple or complex diets. So in this study, they showed early on that the pigs were born with a certain amount of variability in the group. So this is CV, or coefficient of variability, which is a measurement of the percentage of variability in the group. So both these groups were similar at birth in terms of their variation. But after those pigs, after they were weaned, the complex pigs were fed a complex diet. The diet were much more uniform group. They had less variability than the simple diet-fed pigs, and their uniformity was much better. And then they looked at that on out at the end of the finishing period. They maintained that uniformity advantage there all the way out to market. And again, we can presume, because of that we could have those complex fed pigs early on could potentially have less small pigs that could have fallen out during that time period, and presumably have more full market value hogs at the end of the day. And so certainly if you're looking at more simplified diets early on, I encourage you to look at beyond maybe just what the average growth performance is, and you look at uniformity of those groups and see how those pigs get all the way to market in terms of uniformity and the number of full market value hogs at the end of the day. Another strategy we'll briefly look at here is gruel feeding. So this is a strategy where it's really a combination of strategy where we're targeting a set of opportunity pigs, and maybe some of our smaller pigs in the nursery, when they come in, we may put them into pens and we may gruel feed these pigs, and that helps us focus in on some nutrition. We can actually supplement some milk sometimes in some of the products that we might use for these pigs and help with their hydration. As you can see from the feeder there on the right, it's got a reservoir for hydration type of products that you can increase that in these pigs. And then also allows us to feed budget a little different, where we might feed these smaller pigs a little bit longer in some of these early complex diets to help them out and stay with the group. So really our measurements of success of this group would be really looking at that subpopulation of pigs and say, what's the survivability of that subpopulation? What's our ability to improve their weight gain? And really, how does that affect the uniformity of the entire group when we move those, and at the end of the day when we sell those pigs? And so another thing that people can use similar to this is mat feeding on mats when you come into the nursery period. And interestingly, a study had been shown that by mat feeding those pigs just during that first week, you could significantly reduce the number of pull pigs that you pull out of those pens that become low or fallback type of pigs. And when we look at that, if you can reduce the number of fallback pigs, those are generally your pigs that are going to end up being your cull pigs, your lightweight pigs along the way, which really becomes a really high monetary value at that point by doing that. So that's another strategy, intervention strategy that you can look at from a management standpoint. So today we've given you some examples of some early life intervention strategies. Some of these were essential oils and gestation diets. We looked at colostrum bioactives, milk supplementation, and creep feeding. That's all during that lactation period of time. And then we looked at complex nursery diets, formulation, and feed budgeting, as well as gruel feeding or mat feeding as well during that nursery period of time. Now, in terms of taking that information and taking it to your farm, really the key take-homes here are to for farms to really identify what their appropriate subpopulation of opportunity pigs are. So we gave some ideas of some body weight thresholds for some of these areas, and the question becomes is on your particular farm, what does that look like? Where are the opportunity pigs? And some of this may take tracking some pigs, whether it's tagging some pigs or just doing some easy ear notching of pigs based on birth weights or body weights, and then tracking those pigs and kind of seeing where they are within the population. Then the next step from that would be to, okay, we identify our opportunity pigs. Now, what's some potential intervention strategies that we can do? And so we gave you some examples here to look at these early life interventions as some examples. But you also need to look at on your farm is what can I easily implement from a resource standpoint, a labor standpoint. Certainly economics are going to factor into this based upon value of pigs that can swing from as the markets swing. But when you look at those, then taking any particular intervention you see as value and trying to implement that and really track that success. So once you identify that, measure what the effects are on that subpopulation of pigs that you're trying to target and look at their survivability and try to track those on out and try to look and see if your intervention had an impact on that full value market hog percentage when you get out at the end of the day. And so I'll remind you where we kind of started at the beginning, where oftentimes we focus a lot on average daily gain, feed conversion rate, particularly of the average of the group. But really, the greatest potential for profitability can be looking at the number of mortalities, culls, and lightweight pigs, and improving the number of full value market hogs that get to market at the end of the day. And hopefully, we've shown you some data that has illustrated that early life intervention as being a time that can be certainly a value in implementing some of these strategies to help our ultimate goal of more full market hogs at the end of the day. So with that, I appreciate your time, and I think we'll take any questions that you might have.
Well, thank you, Russell, for a great presentation, and a great presentation breeds great questions. So in the respect of everyone's time, we're going to try to keep you within an hour here. So we got about 10 minutes for questions, and we've got a bunch in the hopper already. So let's start off with the first question for Russell. How do you quantify the value of uniformity? What's the benefit of a 10% reduction in final body weight variation?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think as I mentioned, the uniformity thing is a tougher one because it's not something that's commonly measured all the time. And so trying to identify what that is, and really what you see at the end of the day is going to be your how you market those pigs. And again, it's going to depend on your marketing strategy on your farm. But where the value is keeping those pigs closer in body weight is some of that's management. And so in terms of feed budgeting, if the variation gets wider, your smaller pigs start getting further and further behind. So as you feed budget and you move to the next step and you move to the next dietary step, then what happens is, those pigs that are on the smaller end are going to be behind the curve in terms of nutrition when you do that, which makes them fall further and further behind during that time period. Now, in terms of monetary, you can try to measure that in terms of what effect they may be having on the gross performance, but your ultimate measurement is going to be at the end of the day on your full value market hogs at the end of the day. And so I think that variation is going to depend on where you can get most of those pigs in the box, in that packer box, and hit the grid that you need to hit. And that's going to be your biggest value when you go from a low or a subpar value pig in terms of a full value animal there, and that's going to be your biggest profitability. So I'm not sure what an exact number would be in terms of the percentage, and it may depend on your particular situation of being able to tighten that group up and hit the ultimate goal, like I said, is hit more of that box for the packer and hit that full value status or full market value status that we want. So good question. Appreciate that.
Well, thank you, Russell. Next question. At what point should farmers assess the performance of the lactating animal rather than just supplementing the pigs with milk as a first option?
Repeat that first part again. Sorry.
Okay. At what point should farmers assess the performance of the lactating animal rather than just supplementing the pigs with milk as a first option?
Yep. Perfect. Yep. Yeah. Good. Really good question. The question in my mind as you ask that is, okay, how are we providing a Band-Aid, I guess, for the lactation sow if she's nursing well or not, or lactating well or not? The key to remember that we found over years of evaluating this is the pigs will always nurse the sow first before they'll go consume supplemental milk in the crate. Even if they have access to both, they'll always nurse that sow first and then go to the milk secondary. And so a key from that would be if you're having issues with litters without having any milk access in terms of your growth performance, or feel like you're not getting the body weight on those pigs or that you want at the end of that period, that could be something to look at in terms of the sow. Now you go upstream and you look at things like sow lactation feed intake and the lactation diet composition, and those types of things as well can enter into the equation. But certainly, if you're having some issues with body weight, that could be an aspect where you could look at supplementing milk there to improve that, because, again, like I said, those pigs will still go nurse that sow first before they'll go get any supplemental milk there. So that would be that's a good question, and that would be something, if you're not using milk and you see some issues there, it could be something worth looking at for sure. So, yeah, thank you.
Okay. Next question. In the UK, we work hard at looking at the quality of the sow post-weaning to improve ovulation and ova quality for improving piglet birth weight. So we're looking at intervention as early as possible. Is this something you are doing in the States?
So I think I understand where you're coming from there. Evaluating that sow in terms of when she comes out at weaning. Some of that's going to be based on body condition of that sow. And certainly there's some things that we look at from a nutrition standpoint, just from a swine nutritionist standpoint. We'll look at how we address that sow from a lactation, feed composition, and feed intake standpoint, because we know that by feeding that sow in lactation, not only are we feeding that sow for the pigs that are on her now, we actually know we're feeding that sow for the pigs that she's going to have in her subsequent litter, because we know that how we can maintain body condition of that sow, nutrient intake of that sow actually can have an impact on her strength of estrus later, which can have an impact, which is an indication of hormone profile, but also can have an impact on the number of eggs ovulated for that subsequent litter. So in terms of litter size, for certain, that can have an impact on that. I know when you look at in terms of birth weight that you're discussing there, I know there's been some work that's been done here recently that's looked at just birth weights of the pigs and how that affects the sow, particularly when you go from a P1, a parity 1 sow to a parity 2 sow, how that might look when it goes from there. But I think that's probably an area that there's going to be more research that's been done on there. And so probably something in the UK that you may be ahead of on that curve. So, yeah, good question.
Okay. In regards to the use of oregano, how long in gestation should it be fed?
Yep, good question. What we've seen, we've seen that our best investment with that is feeding it during the entire gestation period. And so our recommendation on sows would be feed it through the gestation and the lactation period of time. And so depending on how many challenges that you might have in terms of feed intake or different things, is you might feed a higher level for a few months and then drop it down to kind of a maintenance level for the herd and keep it at a maintenance level. But our best indication has been to feed it the entire gestation and lactation period in sows.
Okay. When talking about simple versus complex diets, how do we know where our current diets match up?
Yes, good question. Like I mentioned, that simple versus complex is not kind of a yes or no question. It's really a spectrum there, and so you can be all over the board in terms of how complex those diets are, and really it's based on the nutrient. Part of its nutrient profile, a lot of its ingredient profile that's there, and so you can really look at your diets if you're able to look at some of the formulation of the diets. If you have premixes or have tags of those diets, you can look at those tags and try to identify what types of ingredients are in that diet, just to give you an idea. If you don't have a lot of detail on that, another aspect of that is simply looking at corn or soybean meal levels in those diets. The amount of soybean meal in that diet can tell you quite a bit in terms of how much other amino acid sources will be in the diet. So if soybean meal is really high in a diet like that, you may not have very many other highly digestible protein or amino acid sources in the diet. If bean meal is kept low, that's an indication that you likely have a lot of those other sources that are there to provide those nutrients for the animal. And so oftentimes as a quick look at that, you can kind of look at your corn or bean meal levels in the diet, and specifically high bean meal can be more indication of a more simplified type of a diet. So good question.
Okay. And as I mentioned prior to the Q&A session here, we're going to respect everyone's time and try and keep it to as close to an hour of full time as possible. So we're going to get to one more question, but those questions that we were unable to answer, Russell or other Ralco experts will do their best to answer those questions in follow-up correspondence. So be patient as those answers will be coming to you. So our last question for the day, on the colostrum product, how is that administered to the pigs?
Okay. Yep. The colostrum bioactive product is First Pulse D, the one I showed the data on there, and that's a liquid oral dosing type of a product. So it's given just as an oral squirt. It's a 2 milliliter dose in the mouth of the pigs, and we give it basically after birth, anytime. It can be given any time in an animal's life, but we give it for that strategy. We try to give it that first day that those animals are born. And it's you pick the pig up and you just give them an oral 2 mil dose, and it's just a one-time dose, and that's how it's applied. So thank you.
Okay. Well, great. Again, I'd like to thank Dr. Russell Fent for an outstanding presentation, and I'd like to thank you, all the listeners at home or wherever you may be listening, for the great questions. And look for correspondence to get some of the unanswered questions sent your way. We would also like to thank Ralco for making today's webinar possible. As a reminder, you will receive a follow-up email that will include a link to view a recording of today's presentation. So if you found this event useful, please share it with your colleagues. Once you leave the event, a short survey will pop up in your browser window. We'd appreciate it if you would share your feedback on this event, as it helps us to provide you with the content most interesting for you. So on behalf of National Hog Farmer and Ralco, have a productive remainder of your day, and most important, stay safe and stay well.